The winter of 1805 was cruel. Snow fell like endless white arrows from the sky, covering the French countryside in silence. The cold pierced through wool coats, through leather boots, through every crack in skin and bone. Soldiers huddled around weak fires, shivering, their shadows dancing on the frozen ground. Among them stood a young man named Jacques, his eyes wide with fear and wonder. He had never been more than a farmer's son. He had never left his village until the draft officers came, banging on the wooden door of his family's small cottage. His father, too old to fight, could only watch as Jacques was taken away to serve the emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who promised glory and victory but demanded blood and obedience. Now Jacques stood in a camp of thousands. The sound of coughing and groaning filled the air. Some men were already sick, others looked half dead from hunger. The fires did little against the wind. The smell of sweat, smoke, and unwashed clothes mixed with the stench of rotting food. That night, Jacques could not sleep. He stared at the black sky, where stars twinkled cold and far away. He thought of home, of bread still warm from the oven, of his mother's voice, of the fields where he used to chase birds. But here there was no bread, only hard biscuits so dry they cracked teeth. Here there was no mother's voice, only the harsh shouts of officers. Here there were no fields, only endless mud and snow. At dawn, the drums began. The sharp rhythm of the drumsticks struck his heart like thunder. Soldiers rose from the ground, shaking snow from their cloaks, tightening straps, checking muskets. The officers shouted orders. "Prepare to march! Prepare to move!" Jacques felt his stomach twist. He had heard stories, how Napoleon's army moved faster than any army in history, how they marched 25 miles in a single day, carrying heavy packs, how the weak were left behind to die. Could he survive such a march? Could anyone? The first march, when the column began to move, it was like a giant snake of men stretching across the frozen land. Muskets rested on shoulders, packs dug into backs, boots sank into snow and mud. The wind blew in their faces, cutting lips and freezing tears. Jacques felt the weight of every step. His pack contained bread hard as stone, a tin cup, and a blanket too thin to block the cold. His musket was heavy, his shoulders already sore. By midday, his feet burned with blisters. Some men coughed blood. One soldier stumbled and fell face first into the snow. An officer rode up on horseback shouting for him to rise. The man tried once, twice, but his legs failed. The officer turned his horse away. The column did not stop. The man lay still as snow covered his body. Jacques' heart pounded. He wanted to stop, to help, but he knew the truth. In Napoleon's army, the march did not wait for anyone. Survival meant moving forward, always forward. The march continued into the night. Men whispered about hunger. Their rations were already low. The bread was moldy, the soup watery, sometimes nothing at all. Some men chewed on grass or leather straps, anything to keep their stomachs from crying too loud. Jacques tried to share a small piece of bread with a soldier beside him, a boy no older than 16. The boy's hands shook as he ate. He whispered, "Thank you." By morning, the boy was gone, his blanket folded on the ground. No one spoke about it. The camp, after 3 days of marching, the army made camp near a river. Tents were rare. Most men slept in the open, lying in mud or snow. Fires were hard to keep lit. The river water was dirty, carrying disease. Many men drank without boiling it. Soon they were doubled over, their stomachs cramping, their bodies shaking with fever. Jacques watched one man collapse near the fire, his face pale as chalk. Within hours he was dead. Others followed. Officers said nothing. Jacques remembered something his father once taught him. Always boil the water before drinking. That night he used his tin cup to heat water over the fire. The taste was bitter, but it saved him. Around him, dozens of men grew sick. Survival was not only about fighting the enemy, it was about fighting hunger, cold, and sickness. Whispers of the enemy rumors spread through the camp. Scouts reported enemy movement. Russian cavalry had been spotted nearby. Some soldiers laughed nervously, others prayed. Jacques checked his musket. He had only 2 bullets. He lay awake, staring into the darkness. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the howl of the wind, felt like an approaching army. His stomach ached with hunger. His body trembled with fear. Would he fire his musket at the enemy? Would he have the courage to stab with his bayonet when horses charged and sabers flashed? He closed his eyes and asked himself, "Could I survive tomorrow? Or will tomorrow be my end?" The officers at sunrise, Napoleon himself rode past the camp. The soldiers stood straight, saluting, their eyes wide as they watched the emperor. He was small in size but large in presence. His uniform was clean, his gaze sharp. He raised his hand and silence fell. His voice carried through the cold air. "Soldiers! You are hungry, you are tired, but you are the finest army in the world. The Russians and Austrians think they can stop us, but they are wrong. Tomorrow we march to glory. Tomorrow we prove that France cannot be broken." The soldiers cheered, though their bellies were empty and their bodies weak. Jacques shouted too, though his voice cracked. For a moment hope flickered in his chest. But when the emperor rode away, silence returned and hunger remained. The march continues. The next march was worse. Snow turned to rain, soaking every coat, every blanket. Mud clung to boots. Men slipped and cursed. Horses stumbled and fell. Jacques' feet bled inside his boots. Every step felt like fire. His stomach screamed. He thought of bread, cheese, meat, but there was none. By night, the column was silent. No songs, no laughter. Only the sound of coughing, of boots dragging, of men too tired to speak. Jacques saw another soldier collapse, his face buried in the mud. The man tried to rise but could not. The column moved on. Jacques forced himself to look away. Survival meant hardening the heart. Nightfall. Suspense. That night, Jacques sat near a small fire with 2 other soldiers. They shared a thin soup made from river water and old bones. The steam rose weakly, but the warmth gave them strength. One soldier whispered, "Scouts say the enemy is close. Maybe tomorrow." Jacques tightened his grip on his musket. He looked at the 2 bullets inside his pouch. His hands shook, the fire crackled. Beyond the glow, the darkness stretched wide and endless. The wind carried strange sounds, whispers, hoofbeats, maybe nothing. He thought of his mother's voice, of the fields, of the warm bread. He thought of the officer's cold eyes, of the man left behind in the snow. The question burned in his mind, louder than hunger, louder than fear. Could I survive as a soldier in Napoleon's army? Could anyone? And as the fire burned low and the night grew colder, Jacques knew the answer was still far away. The morning of battle came with fire in the sky. Dawn painted the clouds red and orange, like the heavens themselves were warning the soldiers below. Smoke from campfires mixed with mist, hiding the valley in a heavy, ghostly fog. Jacques stood in formation, musket in hand, his heart pounding louder than the drums. Around him, thousands of men shifted nervously, boots stomping mud, breath steaming in the freezing air. Officers barked orders. Horses neighed, restless, sensing what was about to happen. The whispers had been true. The Russians and Austrians stood across the fields, waiting. Napoleon's army, though hungry and tired, now faced its greatest test. Jacques' hands shook as he held his musket. He had only 2 bullets. He licked his lips, but they were cracked and dry. His stomach growled, but hunger was the least of his worries now. The sound came first. Deep, rolling thunder. But it was not the sky. It was the cannons. The first shots aboom split the air. The ground trembled. Smoke burst across the field, and a cannonball tore through the line ahead, throwing men into the air like rag dolls. Blood splattered across the mud. Screams followed, high and sharp, cutting through the morning fog. Jacques froze, his body stiff with terror. He had seen hunger, disease, and death on the march. But this was different. The battlefield was chaos itself, and it had only just begun. "Forward!" shouted the officers. The drums rolled, steady and relentless. The line advanced. Muskets were held tight. Bayonets glinted in the weak sunlight. Jacques forced his legs to move. Each step felt heavier than the last. The smoke grew thicker, choking him, burning his eyes. Another cannon roared, and another. Men screamed, fell, and were trampled as the line pushed forward. Holding the line, the enemy cavalry appeared suddenly, bursting through the fog like ghosts on horseback. Dozens, then hundreds of horses thundered toward the French line, their riders raising sabers that shone like silver lightning. "Form square! Form square!" screamed the officers. The soldiers moved quickly, training kicking in. They locked arms, bayonets outward, muskets aimed high. A living wall of steel. Jacques was shoved into place. He raised his musket, his bayonet trembling inches from the horsemen charging at them. The earth shook under the hooves. The sound was deafening. The first wave hit. Horses reared, refusing to impale themselves on the wall of bayonets. Riders slashed down, trying to cut through the men. Muskets fired point blank, the smoke blinding, the noise unbearable. Jacques pulled his trigger. His musket kicked against his shoulder and the rider before him fell, blood spraying across his coat. His ears rang. He barely had time to reload before another horseman crashed against the line. The square held. Somehow it held. The cavalry wheeled away, leaving bodies of men and horses scattered in the mud. The French soldiers cheered weakly, but Jacques could not. His hands shook too much. His stomach churned. His first kill was fresh in his mind. Reload. Under fire, reloading a musket took 20 seconds in peace. In battle, it felt like eternity. Powder in the pan, ram the ball, pull the hammer, all while cannons fired, muskets cracked, and men screamed around you. Jacques fumbled with his powder horn. His fingers were numb, slippery with sweat and blood. A soldier beside him dropped his musket, panicked, and tried to run. He did not make it far. A saber cut him down in seconds. Jacques swallowed hard, forcing himself to finish loading. He aimed into the smoke and fired again. The kick of the musket numbed his shoulder. He could not see if he hit anyone. It did not matter. Firing meant survival. The Emperor's plans the day dragged on. The battle shifted. Napoleon's orders spread like fire through the ranks. Feign weakness, draw the enemy in, then strike hard. The French lines bent, pulling back slowly. The enemy, believing they were winning, pushed forward eagerly. But it was a trap. Jacques, too small in the great machine of war to see the whole picture, only knew confusion. One moment he was advancing, the next he was retreating. Smoke covered everything. He stumbled over bodies, over weapons, over the dying who reached out for help. He could not stop. The line never stopped. Then came the counterattack. French reserves surged forward, their bayonets glinting. Drums beat faster. Trumpets blared. The cry of "Vive l'Empereur" shook the valley. Jacques shouted too, though his voice was hoarse. His musket was empty, his powder nearly gone, but he lifted his bayonet and ran with the rest. The frozen lake by afternoon, the battle turned. The enemy, pressed hard, began to retreat across frozen lakes. The French cannons opened fire, pounding the ice. Cracks spread like lightning. Jacques watched in horror as entire units plunged into the freezing water. Men screamed, their armor dragging them down, their hands clawing at the breaking ice. Horses thrashed wildly before vanishing beneath the surface. The sound was terrible. The cracking ice, the desperate cries, the silence as the water closed. Some French soldiers cheered. Others fell silent, their faces pale. Jacques could not cheer. Victory looked more like slaughter. He clutched his musket and stared, his stomach twisting. Aftermath. When the battle ended, the valley was a graveyard. Smoke hung low. Bodies covered the ground. Blood turned snow into mud. Jacques stood still, trembling, unable to move. His coat was stiff with blood, some his, most not. His hands shook as he looked at them, stained red. Around him, survivors collapsed from exhaustion. Some laughed wildly, others wept. Horses lay dying, their eyes wide with pain. Officers rode past, shouting of glory and victory. Napoleon himself declared it a triumph, the greatest of his career, the Battle of Austerlitz. a day that would be remembered forever. But Jacques did not feel like a hero. He felt empty. His stomach was still hungry, his feet still bleeding, his heart heavy with the faces of the dead. The price of survival. That night, the soldiers gathered around weak fires once more. The air was quiet, too quiet after the roar of battle. The stars above looked cold and distant. Jacques sat with his musket across his knees, staring into the flames. He was alive. He had marched, starved, fought, and killed. He had survived, but survival came with a price. He would carry the memories forever. The man left in the snow. The boy who never woke, the rider who fell by his musket, the men who drowned in the lake. He asked himself again, could I survive as a soldier in Napoleon's army? The answer was yes, but it was not the answer he wanted. Survival was possible, but it demanded everything, body, mind, and soul, and Jacques knew the war was far from over. Tomorrow there would be another march. Tomorrow there would be another battle. Tomorrow, survival would be tested again. Closing suspense. The narrator's voice rises over the silence of the camp. You have marched until your feet bled. You have starved until your belly ached. You have faced cannon fire, cavalry charges, and the freezing waters of the lake. You have survived the blood of Austerlitz. But the war is not finished. The drums of Napoleon's army will beat again. The question remains, if you were there, would you still be standing? Could you truly survive as a soldier in Napoleon's army? The fire crackles, the wind howls, and the story ends with that question echoing in the cold night.